Alright, you guys may be wondering, why is there another white Ram in my shop? Alright, so this is a 2010 4th gen Ram, 6.7 Cummins. It's in phenomenally good shape, honestly. I'll see if Deb can insert some pictures for us here, but overall pretty good. But let me show you what our real problem is here and why I got it so cheap and why there's some work to be done. Alright, so our problem child is this U joint here. You can see it's completely broken. And when that happens, it actually destroys everything in its path. It tries to saw this whole truck in half. So you can see our floor here is seriously damaged, so that's gonna have to be repaired. It also did some serious damage to the wiring harness, so we're gonna have to take that apart, fix it. If you look over here, this wiring is completely destroyed, so we'll be replacing that. And then our transfer case is toast, the motor is toast, and then there's actually some damage to this tail housing as well that we're gonna have to take care of. I'll probably just weld that up myself, that's not a big deal. Took out the fuel lines and brake lines as well, so some work to be done, but well worth it for this truck. Get it back on the road. All right, first things first, we are going to pull this drive shaft out. Need a bigger one than that. Always pull drive lines out with wobble, seems to be the easiest. Suckers are in there for good. You had to break out the I wasn't asking bar on that one. Normally when you pull these things out, they'd leak everywhere, but mine has a giant hole in it, so it's probably not going to leak. Alright, rear drive shaft out. Alright, these front drive lines are always a treat because of these Torx bolts. They like to strip. So, first thing I always do is make sure they're cleaned out. These ones are actually really clean. So when you go get a Torx bit, hopefully they'll come out easy. Most likely they're not. Alright, got luck on one. See if the same luck holds out on the other ones. 2 down. Three down. Hell yeah. We're gonna see if this flange will get persuaded loose, and it did. So here's our problem. You can see the ears on these things get snapped off. That's actually a maintenance issue. So these U-joints have to be greased, and if they're not greased, they'll bind up, and one of the caps flips off, and then it'll ejecto out of the transfer case, and it pretty much saws everything in half that's in its way. It's always fun when pieces of transfer case come off your skid plate. That's neat. Cross member. Overall, this truck is in pretty awesome condition. It's about 227,000 miles, but everything seems to be in good working order other than the transfer case that has a giant hole in it. All right, I think it's time to time lapse. All right, the very first thing we're gonna do is you have to kind of come up with your plan of attack of how you want to do this. So I'm looking at the transfer case, and it is obviously destroyed, and I'm honestly worried about how it's gonna come out. Is it gonna fall on my head? Am I gonna drop it on the floor? Am I gonna smash my phalanges? I'm a little concerned right here. So gotta get it up, supported. Once I was content that this thing wasn't gonna fall on my face, we're gonna support the transmission, just make sure that's solid, and then we'll lower it down to give ourselves a little bit of room. All right. If you're ever trying to work on one of these transfer cases in truck, there's 2 bolts on the top that are going to be impossible unless you lower the trans down just a little bit and use a stubby. So, short of advice, if you're trying to get to them, plan on having this ready. Yeah, this is always fun trying to reach up on top of a transfer case. Even with the lift, it's kind of a pain in the ass. The stubby makes it easier. I did ask for a ratcheting stubby for Christmas, and I hope Santa brings that. No guarantees. Debbie, if you're listening, you're Santa.
I mean, I'm right here, so yeah, I'm hearing.
Okay, so I forgot to turn off time lapse when I was pulling the transfer case out, but the transfer case is going to magically go to the floor pretty quickly. All right, here's where we're at. So, moved everything from the wiring harness to see what the damage was. Looks like all of these wires are damaged or completely cut. The main wiring harness going to the back, same thing. Even though these ones are still together, they're all gonna have to be repaired. But I cleaned everything off, cleaned up the floor damage. Let me go over here so you can see it a little better. So that is a pretty serious gaping hole in the floor that's gonna have to be repaired. Pulled back all the insulation so I can start working on that. Yeah, we'll get to rewiring this thing, get all the repairs done. Next step's gonna be fuel. Let me show you guys the damage on the transfer case now that it's on the ground. You might be able to see it a little better. All right. So, not supposed to have a vent hole like that. So, whole transfer case is completely trashed. Motor's completely trashed. The good news is, though, there's some damage on this tail shaft. You can see the damage here. But if you look on the inside, I thought I was gonna have to weld up a crack, but everything on the inside, there's nothing leaking, and it appears to be in pretty good shape. So I think we're good on the tail shaft, which is nice. Don't have to repair that. We'll just do a little bit of wiring work, get our new fuel lines and brake lines ran, and we'll get this sucker back up and running.
So the very first thing we're gonna do on all of this is snip the wires. So even though the wires were together, the sheathing was damaged. You could see it was damaged, so I didn't feel comfortable. So I cut out any spot that I wasn't comfortable with. What I started doing quite a while back is I like these little marine grade connectors that have solder built in. So they are a heat shrink tubing that have solder inside of them. And then as long as you keep your heat gun on long enough and you have it hot enough, it actually solders the wire and heat shrinks it all in one go. So what I like to do is I actually pull the wire all the way through. I twist the wire together. I pull the connector over that twisted connection. Then I heat it up and it solders it. I used to always do these with a soldered connection, but there's some new stuff out that makes this way easier. So this was still relatively time consuming, but significantly less than it would have been had I used the traditional method of pulling each, soldering everything, then heat shrinking. You can do it all in one go with a solder stick type connector, and it seals out water really, really well. So we get through getting these all connected back together, and you see that I put electrical tape around a few of them, and that's just because they're larger wires and I'm afraid they're gonna chafe. So I actually just double wrapped a few of these wires that I felt might chafe and get into another wire. So here I'm just connecting up all the transmission wiring and transfer case wiring. So same thing, we snip the wires, we do our solder stick connectors, get all those connected. The real confusing piece of this is actually the transfer case connector, and I found a really cool company called findpigtails.com, a pre-terminated connector, and that's the one you see here with the white wires coming down. And it makes it really, really easy if you have enough existing wiring to terminate back up to, and this will connect right into the actuator motor of the transfer case. So I used the normal method that I already mentioned with my solder stick connectors. But what I'm doing is I'm actually looking at a wiring diagram. You can't see it because I'm looking down at my phone, but I have a wiring diagram that tells me which color goes to which pin on that connector. And then I'm connecting them up because the other connector that you saw in the video was completely trashed. So I ended up having to use an actual wiring diagram. Thanks to the internet, now you can find those wiring diagrams pretty simple. But that made this job way easier than trying to pin out an actual connector or find a used one.
All right, all the wires fixed. We'll just loom them back up real neat.
So now it's time for the fun part. You got to make the wires look all pretty again and make sure they're not going to get damaged. So we're capping all the wires that are not going to be used out of this wiring harness. Then we're going to wrap everything in electrical tape. We're going to zip tie every so often. We're going to put the factory wiring loom back on. Dodge actually has this plastic channel that runs the entire length of the frame anywhere that they feel it might chafe. So that plastic you can see hanging down, that's a factory Dodge part. So it comes from the factory where it's basically wrapped in cloth backed tape. And that goes inside of that channel. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just doing the same thing, wrapping it with the cloth backed electrical tape, putting it back inside of its normal harness. I'm using the factory pins up on the top of the frame to mount that harness up correctly. So you can see now it's all tucked up nice and out of the way. We're gonna do the same thing with this transmission and transfer case wiring. And then I am using some corrugated wire loom protector on this, just like they would from the factory. You can see the stuff over on my right already has that corrugated material. I'm just gonna add more of that corrugated material so it goes all the way to the transmission. That just keeps the wires themselves protected from any damage. And I always like put electrical tape around everything, just try and seal up from water, because the underneath of these vehicles see quite a bit of water splashed up. And if you have water sitting inside of that harness, it'll actually just start corroding into the wire, especially if you have any openings. You'll get random shorts that you have to figure out. So this is just the start of this truck. We have quite a bit left to do. We have some steering stuff that needs to be addressed. Not that it was damaged as part of this incident, but just maintenance items that I've noticed on the truck. And if we're gonna have myself or Troy driving this truck around, it's gonna be safe. We have to get to our braking system and fuel system, because both the line that feeds the rear brakes and the fuel line were completely cut, both the supply and the return. So we're gonna be using an air dog, bypassing all those factory lines and creating new ones, as well as putting in a new factory brake line that's going from the front to the rear.